5-MeO DMT.
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting sundial. Alright, I've scrapped my idea for the atmospheric perspective orange glazing on the second row of figures, and instead I'm going to make them just as brightly colored as the foreground figures. So I've mixed up, let's see here, a green for the chameleon, a set of grays for the fly, sort of a rose brownish color for the roach, ladybug, bright Vincent van Gogh red, a mailbox for the gray, as well as the flies, kind of balance it out a little bit, and the centipede will be ochre, and then the hornet, oh shit, I need to mix up some yellow for the hornet. Okay, so other than that, all the colors are set and ready to go. I'm going to throw a little yellow down there real quick so I don't have to stop mid-flow.
I felt amazing unconditional love for myself.
Alright, there we go.
Even just typing this letter, I tear up. It took 34 years to finally love myself. And I'd say that's pretty good. If she did it in 34 years, she's way ahead of the game. I asked how to hold on to this, how to keep my dragon, and this amazing love that I've discovered. It was made clear. Honor thyself, make decisions that strengthen you, not weaken you. Release ego. If you live to prove something, to please others, you will kill your dragon. And a few other points that she learned, but it's that phrase about if you live to prove something, to please others, you will kill your dragon. I suggest that all of us, that the dragon is her phrase. That may not be an entity or an image that personally resonates with you, but whether it does or not, what she's talking about, Andrea's talking about, is finding herself and connecting with her essence. And I'm suggesting to you that all of us, doesn't matter what we believe impels us to do this work with the plant spirits. What we're actually looking for essentially is ourselves. And if we're looking essentially for ourselves, the question is, why do we have to look? What happened? And how does this experience with the plants, substances, help us find ourselves? Now, as some of you know, my work, amongst others, has been with addictions. And in addiction, there's a very interesting phrase that's used. When you heal from addiction, it's called recovery. And recovery is another interesting word because we just take it for granted, but think about it for a moment. What does recovery mean? It means that you find something that you've lost. You find something that you've lost, but whatever you found couldn't have been destroyed, and it must have been there all along, otherwise you couldn't find it. So what is it that people recover when they recover from, say, addiction? Well, what they recover, and I often ask this question, and the spontaneous response, including at a talk I gave yesterday, is, I found myself. So people recover themselves, which is exactly what Andrea is writing about. She found her dragon, she found herself. And then the question then is, how do we lose ourselves? And why is it so difficult to reconnect? And how do these experiences with the plants help us? How do they facilitate this reconnection? And that question leads to the very essence of trauma. Because what I'm suggesting is that it's trauma that makes us disconnect in the first place. In fact, it's not that trauma that makes us disconnect. Trauma is the disconnection. And my friend Peter Levine, who's one of the world trauma experts, written a wonderful book, amongst many other wonderful books, called Waking the Tiger. And he defines trauma is the loss of connection with yourself. This is a fundamental fracture, a loss of connection to ourselves, our families, and the world around us. This loss is often hard to recognize because it happens slowly over time. We adapt to these subtle changes, sometimes without even noticing them. And so, trauma is not the external event that happens. Trauma is the impact of that event, which is the disconnection from ourselves. And because it can be subtle and happen over time, we actually adapt in such ways that we believe we're the adaptations. We start to think that we are the adaptations that we've come to as a result of the trauma of disconnection. So we start to believe that we are the disconnection, and we are the forms and manifestations that that disconnection assumes. Now, this definition that Peter gives is also the one given by other great spiritual teachers. Eckhart Tolle says, basically all emotions are modifications of one primordial, undifferentiated emotion that has its origin in the loss of awareness of who you are beyond the name and the form. And that's associated with a sense of abandonment, with a sense of incompleteness. And he says the simplest word for it is pain. But pain, of course, is so non-specific. It's that loss of self. And my other great mentor, A.H. Almaas, writes, the fundamental thing that happened, and the greatest calamity, is not that there was no love or support. He's talking about in childhood. Let me pause here for a moment and tell you that as a physician, I found that it doesn't matter what the ailment is. The essence of it is the loss of connection to the self. So whether you've got multiple sclerosis, whether you got rheumatoid arthritis, chronic fatigue, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic asthma, cancer, ALS, it actually begins with a disconnection from the self. I will not have the time to prove that to you today. That's a whole other talk. I'm just telling you my conclusion about that. I've written about it. If you're moved to do so, you can read about it. But the essence of all this dis-ease or disease is that disconnection from the self, and the result of the adaptations. It's not that the disconnection makes us sick, it's our adaptations to that disconnection that make us sick. So what begins as an adaptation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, ends up causing illness. And whether that's physical illness or mental illness, it doesn't matter. It all comes to the same thing. And the same with addiction. So addiction is just another adaptation. Addiction, some of you know I worked in the downtown east side of Vancouver. North America is the most concentrated area of drug use. And every person down there had been abused as a child. And all the women I worked with have been sexually abused. All the men have been traumatized sexually or in other ways. The addiction is not the problem. The reason that we don't treat addiction very well, which is to say that we don't treat it very well is an understatement, is precisely because we don't get that the addiction is not the problem. The addiction is an adaptation. And let me just give you my definition of addiction. Any behavior that gives you temporary relief, pleasure, that you crave, and that you pursue despite negative consequences. So that's an addiction. Any behavior. Drugs, sex, gambling, internet, relationships, work, whatever it is, eating. It's any behavior that provides temporary relief and pleasure, and you crave despite the negative consequences. So that's an addiction. So let me ask you, by that definition, how many of you would agree that at some time or another you've had some kind of addictive pattern in your life? Just raise your hands, would you? Okay, all right. So let me ask some of you that are willing to say so. And I'm not going to ask you what you're addicted to or when or for how long, but simply, what did it do for you? Not what was wrong with it, but what did you like about it? Okay, so anybody? Yes? It gave you pleasure. Okay, great. Thank you. Who else? Yes? I'm sorry? Okay, avoidance of conflict. Thank you, yes. It eases the pain, yes. Distraction from the pain. Okay, great. So thank you. I mean, we could go on, but can you see that everything you said, easing of pain, avoidance of conflict, pleasure, these are normal human aspirations. There's nothing wrong with any of them. In other words, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem is, how come on God's green earth you could find no pleasure? Something get blocked. your capacity to experience pleasure and joy. Something had created so much conflict in your life that you had to escape from it. Something had given you so much pain that you needed distraction or relief from the pain. And hence my mantra, the first question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And that pain goes back to that original disconnection. And so my other teacher, A.H. Almas, says, speaking about childhood, the fundamental thing that happened and the greatest calamity is not that there was no love or support. The greater calamity, which is caused by that first calamity, is that you lost the connection to your essence. That is much more important than whether your mother or father loved you or not. And by extension, I'm going to make the perhaps astonishing statement that the fundamental problem was not that you were sexually abused, was not that you were beaten, was not that you were abandoned, not that your parents couldn't love you the way you needed to be loved. It's that as a result of all that, you lost the connection to yourself. That's the trauma. So there's the external event, then the impact. And although it's impossible to have it happen this way, but had you been beaten and abused, but had that not resulted in the disconnect from yourself, you would not have been traumatized. And so that what are we looking for then is that reconnection with ourselves. And the loss of connection itself is an adaptation. Why is that an adaptation? Because if it's so painful to be myself, I better disconnect. If it's so painful for me to be aware of my gut feelings and to be able to assert them and to manifest them and to declare them, I better disconnect from my gut feelings. And it's that connection from the gut feeling, which happens right in the body, that's the trauma. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to compensate. How do we compensate? Well, through addiction. Or we compensate by developing certain personality patterns that then will somehow try to get us indirectly what we didn't get in the first place, which is the love that would have allowed us to connect to ourselves. So then we become our personalities. At least we become who we think we are as a personality. So if you didn't get the attention that you needed as a child, just for yourself, then you might become consumed by attracting attention, then you'll be attractive all the time. And hence the $30 billion cosmetic surgery industry. Because people have lost the connection to themselves. And now they want validation from the outside. Or you didn't get the approval you needed for who you were, now you want to win approval from others as a substitute. You weren't valued for who you were, now you're consumed by measuring up to others' expectations so that you can get your sense of value through what others think of you, what other people think of you. You weren't esteemed for who you are, now you're going to be wanting to impress people all the time. And then these are all adaptations. These are all adaptations. But we mistake ourselves for adaptations. And then because we couldn't be ourselves, because being ourselves would have meant too much pain, too much suffering, too much vulnerability. Vulnerability, the Latin word vulnerare, to wound. Our wound would be too raw. We cover up our vulnerability by these compensatory mechanisms, and we close our hearts. And when we close our hearts, we no longer know how to love ourselves or others. And we no longer have pleasure or joy. And then you have the statement by Meister Eckhart, who's the 13th century spiritual master, who says, a human being has so many skins inside, covering the depths of the heart. We know so many things, but we don't know ourselves. Again, that loss of self. Why? 30 or 40 skins or hides, as thick and as hard as an ox's or a bear's, cover the soul. And he says, go into your ground and learn to know yourself there. Well, why to develop these skins, these hides? These are the compensations. These are how we try and protect ourselves from that woundedness. And that same adaptation that helped us endure those early losses, and primarily the loss of ourselves, then become our burden, then become our separation from the world. That's the source of our alienation. And the problem is this doesn't only happen on an individual level, it happens in a social level. Because we live in a society that actually is profoundly alienated. And we live in a society that actually validates our invalidity. We live in a society that validates our false self. So that not only do we develop these compensatory mechanisms, it's even that we're rewarded for it. So let's say you're a deeply wounded person and you emotionally shut down so badly that your eyes go dead because you were hurt so badly you couldn't bear to look at reality. And let's say that you're so scared of vulnerability that you're going to attack vulnerability wherever you see it. And let's say that you feel so weak because you lost that connection to your true self, that you have to have power and control. You know what becomes of you? You become Prime Minister of Canada. That's a deeply traumatized person that just displaced. He is. He is. And now we've elected another one. Maybe not quite so traumatized. Maybe not quite so wounded. Maybe a little bit more connected. Maybe a little bit. That's the best we can hope for. What I'm saying is that the world rewards, or in my case, the world rewards my workaholism, because looking at this wonderful doctor, always available for everybody except himself, and everybody except the people that we need and close to. So the world rewards it, and so, as the author of the book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying says, the greatest achievement of modern culture is the brilliant selling of samsara. Samsara is the cycle of suffering, and its barren distractions. Modern society seems to me a celebration of all the things that lead away from truth, make truth hard to live for, and discourage people even from believing that it exists. So not only do we suffer this trauma because our parents are unconscious or so hurt themselves that they simply couldn't help traumatizing us, we then have a world that validates the falseness, that validates the personality which was developed as a compensation for the loss. And that's why it's so difficult. And that's why even when people go into ceremony with a plant or with LSD, which is not a plant but a substance, or holotropic breathwork, or meditation, and whatever experiences they have, and there are experiences of tremendous insight that people can journey through these various modalities. The real difficulty is not in having those experiences. The real difficulty is then how do you make that experience live in your life? How do you manifest that insight in your daily living when the world is so intent of unrobbing you of the very truth of things? Because the economy, the capitalist economy, depends on your false sense of self. If you're truly too connected to yourself, you wouldn't buy most of the products that you buy. At least you wouldn't be so attached to them. You know, I was in San Francisco 3 or 4 years ago, and my wife and I were walking somewhere in the downtown area, and we found this line of people, 4 or 5 abreast, right around the block. So I said to somebody, okay, what's this all about? What are you people lining up for? He says, the iPad, the new iPad just came out. And I said, okay, I get it. I don't have an iPad. I don't appreciate its multifold benefits, but nevertheless, I said, okay, I can believe that the iPad is a wonderful instrument, but why are you lining up? I couldn't get it tomorrow. Or Man, you don't understand. It's the iPad. I mean, mean, this guy actually thought, and I've had the same thoughts related to other products, that this is going to somehow make a difference in his life. So I mean, this society just feeds off that. So then, let me tell you a few things that I've learned in this psychedelic experience. And I began to work with ayahuasca about 8 years ago now, I guess, when my book on addiction came out, and I kept getting these emails or of questions at my speaking engagements. What do I know about ayahuasca and the healing of addiction? And I'd say, well, I don't know anything about it really. And next question. And a week later, another email or another inquiry, what do you know about ayahuasca and the healing of addiction? I said, nothing. Next question. And I finally started getting annoyed. And I've said this before, but I started feeling like Brian in The Life of Brian. Have you seen that movie? Where people think that Brian is the Messiah, and they keep genuflecting, and they keep, wanting to worship him. And he's saying, listen, I'm not the Messiah, leave me alone. But finally he gets sick of it, and he says, okay, I'm the Messiah, now fuck off, okay? And these people come to him and say, how shall we fuck off, my Lord? And that's how I was with ayahuasca. Okay, I don't want anything with ayahuasca, now fuck off. And then I got the message that maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. I do have a thick brain, a very thick mind. And I was working with psilocybin this summer with a therapist in San Francisco, and I did say to her, listen, you better give me a whole whack of it because I have a very thick mind, But I got it, there was a message here, and so then I began to work with it, and I really see how it can help. How can it help? And not just ayahuasca, but any path, any substance, and sometimes other paths that don't involve substances. I mean, one of the things I don't want to create here is the impression that I'm not one of these messianic believers in substances or plants. I really am not. Some of you maybe, I'm not. I don't think they're the answers to the problems of the world. I think it's too bad if they were, because they're never going to be around enough of them, and not enough people will participate in them, that they're going to be the answer. The answer is going to have to come from somewhere else. And where the answer is going to have to come from? Deep inside people, because the truth is already there. So the plants don't give us the truth, the plant helps us manifest and see the truth. That's a great path, but I'm not messianic about it. But nevertheless, since we're talking about plants and the plant spirit, how can they help us? So in two ways really. Well, at least two ways. The first one, when I first did ayahuasca, because somebody said, you know what, you can actually do a ceremony up here in Vancouver, and a Peruvian shaman that I know Andrew works with, Diego Palma, was up here, and he was leading ceremonies, and about an hour into it, this beautiful music was playing, and there were tears of joy and pleasure coursing down my face, and I felt this tremendous love, and it wasn't love. There was love for particular people, but it was much greater than that. And what I really got was that this love is actually my essence. Which is not to say, and the essence that I've been disconnected from all my life, these skins that I've developed over my heart to protect myself from the pain, because when your heart is open and the love is flowing, you really can get hurt. And last year in December in Yalapa, where I lead the retreats with ayahuasca, I had the experience of my heart opening up and trust connecting me with the universe, and I got that. Really, that's their essence. That opening, that open-heartedness, that love is their essence. And if that's our essence, why don't we realize it? Why doesn't Stephen Harper realize it? Why don't the rest of us realize it? It's because it hurts so much when it's not reciprocated. It hurts so much when it's not understood. It hurts so much when it's wounded. And so we develop these skins, we shut down. And specifically about addictions. Addictions, like many other behaviors, are all about escaping from the pain. But if we realize that that love is really our very essence, there's nothing to run away from. What's there to run, if you really get it? And the other thing that the plant spirits can do is they can connect us to the experiences in a very deep way that made us run in the first place. And so sometimes people talk about bad experiences with ayahuasca or acid or anything. From my point of view, when somebody talks about a bad experience, two things are going on. One is their personality, their mind is judging the experience. Because the personality was developed in the first place to run away from the pain. And all these things that we think we are, they're just our personality, which was developed in the first place as a compensation not to feel pain. But secondly, it also means that when they had that experience, they didn't have the right guidance. Because in the appropriate context, and this is where I think I will probably not be the only one at this conference to emphasize this, but whatever you do, and I know some of you have journeyed by yourselves, I don't recommend it. If you choose that, you choose that. But really, I think we're such complicated, complex beings in the Western world, and there's so much cultural and psychological barrier between who we think we are and who we actually are, that it's really safer to engage in these journeys with people that are experienced and somewhat wise in helping us guide us through it. So when somebody talks about a bad experience, I say, no, you didn't have a bad experience. What you had is an experience where you experienced pain. What you had was an experience where you were in touch with a lot of fear, maybe even terror. But that pain and that terror,
all right, 49. Whoa,
you've been carrying inside yourself all your life.
49 seconds left, so I got to wrap this up. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting sundial.
It's only bad.
Thank you for watching and have a good day, Earth.
Digest the experience.